Okay, so many of you, first of all, thank you all for coming, and I appreciate walking down the hall to the senior center. I hope they didn't do that on purpose. All right. Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess, yeah. Okay, so the question I'm going to ask today is, why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed? Anybody? Standard answer, you can't be wrong. Ricky, why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed? Sinat Chinam. Anyone else?
Corruption. The Roman Empire was just much more powerful.
Okay, militarily the Romans were better soldiers, right? Yeah, what else? Corruption. What else? What's your name? Shlomo, why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed?
They didn't say Birkat Torah.
Okay, good. So the answer really is, there were 10. There were 10 answers, and one answer that Eli gave was much different than the other 10 that I'm going to give you now. So let me share with you the 10 answers that the Gemara brings for why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. You're going to tell me if they're good or not. And then we're going to go into the source of what the Gemara says of what actually happened. Because it does describe it in a very unique way. And most people know the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, but no one has ever read through the whole entire thing. And unfortunately, rabbis who present and say Sinat Chinam really are being disingenuous. Because really it's not so much Sinat Chinam from the story. In fact, it blames the rabbis. But if you're a rabbi, why would you say that, right? Okay. So the most popular answer is, Ricky gave the most popular answer, is in Masechet Yomah, in the tractate Yomah, which is the Babli. It talks about Sinat Chinam. It says, B'pnei she'eitav bo Sinat Chinam. The reason the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed was because of Sinat Chinam. However, that's only one. I told you there were 10. That's right, because if you look in other sources in the Gemara, it gives you different reasons. In Baba Metzia, it says because they didn't follow the spirit of the law, instead they followed the letter of the law. They ruled too harshly. Those are just two sources. Now, the motherlode of all the sources of why the Beit HaMikdash destroyed is in Masechet Shabbat, page 119b. It offers 10 reasons. One, obviously, is they didn't observe Shabbat. 2 is they ceased reading Shema and Tefillah. Third, they neglected education of school children. They sinned before each other without shame. Number 5, the young thought they were equal to their elders. 6, they didn't rebuke one another. 7, they held scholars in contempt. And 8 is they were no longer men of integrity. So the Gemara offers 10 full reasons as to why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Now, what's the problem with this? Many of us have always heard which one? Sinat Chinam. Why? Why is that? What do you think that is? Catchy, go ahead. Okay, it's nice, but all these others are pretty nice too, right? If you would, they didn't judge by the spirit of the letter of the law. Instead, they should judge by the spirit of the law, not the law. Not going to tell a kid that. That's a very. What's your name? Jack. So Jack brings up a very good point. It seems to be in the last 100 or so years, the story that rabbis have gotten from the pulpit is to tell people Sinat Chinam. So the onus for the destruction of Beit HaMikdash is on us. Wait a second. I just read you 9 others, and it didn't seem they were all us, right? There were others such as they were no longer men of integrity. They didn't build yeshivot. They neglected the education of children. Why don't they bring those up? And it seems to be from the pulpit, many rabbis throughout, especially the last 50 years, have used Sinat Chinam because A, it's, as Jack mentioned, it's a very simple catchphrase. 2, it puts the onus on the population, on the people sitting in the chairs, instead of people standing on the stage. And that's going to be a very, very big deal when we read the story. And number 3, it really is something that we could all internalize. It's something that everyone could walk away with. Those are my 3 reasons that I think that Sinat Chinam really got top billing, although it really shouldn't, because it's only one small source out of a total of 10. Okay, is everyone cool with that? Good. Where's Eli's reason for the Beit HaMikdash being destroyed in the Gemara? That the Romans were better military men, that they had a more unified army, and that the Jews weren't unified at all. Where is that in the Gemara? Where is it, David? Non-existent. Why is it non-existent?
Because it doesn't teach anything.
It doesn't teach anything. So what did you just discuss?
But the fact that they were unified is stemming from the fact that there's
But how come no mention, if I had asked you, why did Israel win the 6-day war, what would you say? Because the people observed Shabbat? What would you say?
God was on our side.
Huh?
God was on our
All
side.
right, give me a better one.
They wiped out everyone's
The Air Force was wiped out about 8 o'clock in the morning. The Egyptian Air Force was wiped out. Israel had control of the skies from the afternoon on, and were able to destroy the other invading armies. That's really militarily simple. That's a military answer as to what happened instead of why it happened. And that's going to be a crucial thing when you see history, rabbinic history. Rabbinic history is not concerned of events the way they were. They look at them as a reason that one could learn from. So, does anyone know who Thucydides was? He's a very important character in world events. Thucydides. He is the father of history. What did Thucydides do? Scientific history. He wrote the history of the Peloponnesian Wars, which were the war between Sparta and Athens in the year 411 BCE. What does he do that makes him the father of scientific history? He does not use, allude, or even make any small reference to the gods being involved in the war. Instead, he uses facts and analysis in order to really lay out the reasons why Sparta and Athens fought and the outcome. And that's a key point in history. Because now, from 411 BCE, we now know how to write history. Although it wasn't followed as much, the gods were still given credits for wars and reasons for wars, and the Jews did the same thing. So, Thucydides gives us the reason why the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, according to what Eli said. They were much better military men. So the answer that we have, the question really you have to ask first, is what is the purpose of the Gemara's relating of narrative in terms of history? What's its purpose? Why does the Gemara lay out this so-called history in its own style? Anybody?
Well, there's something to learn from there.
That's right. If you can't learn from it, it really serves no purpose. Can anyone recount the Napoleonic Wars, or even the battles of World War I, or World War II, or the Civil War? They become irrelevant several years later. They're probably only studied in military academies like West Point. Other than that, there's really not much to learn from them. So the Gemara was not concerned with relating history to the way we define history. And that's a key point and extremely important. Hold on one second, Jack. Why? Because the high school student learns in school that they're learning history. They now go to college and they sit in a class and everything that the Gemara told them is wrong. And they basically can come to two conclusions. One, everything that the rabbis taught me in school was foolish. Or two, everything I'm hearing now from my college professor is wrong. That's really it. It's either one or the other. They don't know how to synthesize both worlds. And the reason is, we never taught them. And you never learned it. It's that simple. I learned it just the past 10, 15 years looking through. The extreme that I took was the rabbis were fools. To the other extreme, they weren't recording history. To where I am in the middle, where I researched and said they weren't recording history. And if one looks at the Gemara in that kind of eye, of saying that they weren't recording history, they're recording lessons, all the fantasies and the fiction that the Gemara creates in these stories has to be seen to have a purpose. When we read the Kamsa Bar Kamsa story, you're going to see that most of you have only learned one part. You never went all the way to the end. And if you go all the way to the end, it becomes a very fanciful story, which keeps pointing to one main point, which I'll get to at the end. I don't want to spill the beans on that. So, to quote, to explain, the Gemara explains why disasters happen and how the Jewish people can best avoid them. Their goal was not to record what actually happened, but to impart enduring lessons for future generations of rabbis and Jews. That's why the Gemara records these events. And that's why, and you say, does it work? Well, it does work, because we're all here 2,000 years later discussing and reflecting on it. If we just said it was a military battle like Eli suggested, we'd basically be studying it on a weekday and not really caring much. But instead, in the seeds of destruction, the rabbis planted also the seeds of redemption by giving us the benefit of teaching us reasons that all are incumbent upon us. Has everyone got that? Anyone disagree? Okay, Jack, you had a question?
Yeah, just a question on, let's say the military aspect of why we lost the war. That could also be included as lessons learned from it. As meaning, why can't also say that we also need to defend ourselves and let's say, build
but they never brought up. In fact, if you look at the Hasmonean Wars, the Hashmonaim, right? We did this in the class of mine a couple of years ago. For 6 to 8 weeks, we went through the Hasmonean Wars, all of them, all the battles, and they're pretty intricate and amazing of what kind of military leader Yehuda HaMaccabi was. And yet, we don't hear about them because there was nothing to learn from them other than a military battle. What do we learn about the Hashmonaim? That they stood up against Hellenism. That's really the only message that we can get out of that. The military battles, they're moot today. They wouldn't really impact our lives. Okay, so what we're going to do, okay, pass them out please. We're going to go through the whole story of Kamsan Bar Kamsav, why the destruction took place. We're going to go right through it. We're going to do a literary analysis of it with as much time as we have. Let me just make sure I get through everything so I stay on point. And you're going to see a fascinating example of rabbinic history. This, I think, is one of the finest because it includes some truth, some fact, a lot of fiction, and a lot of fantasy, all wrapped into one. But there's a point to all of it, and that's going to be the key. Okay, does everyone have a copy? Okay, let's start. So, when we read this story in the Gemara, we have to realize we're really not reading 100% factual events. And you're going to see why it's going to be so obvious. The point is the Gemara was going for a much, much different point of why it happened instead of what happened. Secondly, when was this written? When was the Gemara redacted? Anyone have any idea? What years? Okay, that was the Yerushalmi. The Bavli, which we're reading from, was redacted from as early as 400 to some say as late as 800. Now, when did the destruction take place?
70.
Okay, year 70, right? So you think about this, just to put it in perspective. It's as if we were writing a history, if you will, of the Mayflower, which happened in the 1600s, or the American Revolution, which we knew sooner. It's so far away from the actual event. We also know, because in the Gemara that we're going to read, we didn't have the original, it's going to be written Aramaic. Aramaic was written much later. So when you see Hebrew, that was written Tanaitic, the year 200 or so, as a general rule. Here we're going to read something that the rabbis took and reinvented and recreated their history, which was about 400 to 500 years after the event. Okay, so keep in mind, and I don't want you to lose this, remember, the whole point of this Gemara is to tell us why and not what. Okay? If we just did the what, it'd be boring, it'd be over, it'd be history. Here, we're learning rabbinic history. Okay, said Rabbi Yochanan. You got that, A1? Okay. Rabbi Yochanan, what is the meaning of the verse? Happy is the man who is cautious always, but he who hardens his heart shall fall into misfortune. So right off the bat, the Gemara does a very interesting style. It's going to give us a quote in the words of Rabbi Yochanan. This quote's going to come back to us later. We're not going to see it here. He starts over the quote. Really, basically what he's saying is the person who's cautious is good, but if you harden your heart at the wrong time, if you do the wrong thing at the wrong time, bad things are going to happen. So he starts off, Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsan Bar Kamsa, on account of a rooster and a hen, Tur Malkah was destroyed, Betad was destroyed on account of a shaft of a litter. Now, it tells us about 3 destructions. First Jerusalem, which we're going to do now, and then all the way at the end of this whole content, this whole subject matter, is going to be the story of Tur Malkah was destroyed, and then it's going to be another place, Betad. Betad, does anyone know what Betad was? Why Betad was so important? What was that? What year? 135. Right. 135 CE. This was the last stronghold in Judea. Once Betad fell, we didn't have sovereignty, we didn't have a fortress, we didn't have a military for the next 2,000 years. Betad was an extremely important point because it was a fortress, it was the last remaining fortress against the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which happened between 132 and 135 CE. So the Gemara is going to tell us three things. The last 2 are going to happen at the end of the story. Now it's extremely important when you look at a story in Gemara that you look at the whole content, the whole entire thing. If there were 2 stories or 3, you have to read all of them together. The editors of the Gemara did not want you just to extract one part of it and walk away. They wanted to give you a whole total picture of the event. So by taking out a part and just just basically learning that or just somebody mentioning it from the pulpit, they're really doing a disservice. That's like an author who has a book and all of a sudden you just take out 2 chapters without what happened before or after. You really don't get the whole general gist of what's going on. Okay, so now keep in mind, and I want to quote you from the book Jerusalem Against Rome. You don't have it here, but it says, Rabbi Yochanan does not really seek to elucidate the immediate causes of the uprising against Rome. War must be a result of divine plan, and this including from the outset the defeat and destruction of Jerusalem. Such a punishment can only assume a serious fault. Rabbi Yochanan denounces certain unacceptable and wicked behavior in society in which he sought to underline the dramatic consequence. So that is Rabbi Yochanan's viewpoint. He's going to share with us why this happened. Okay. Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. There was a man whose friend was Kamsa and whose enemy was Bar Kamsa, and made a banquet. I'm sure you all know this, but we're going to keep going on. He said to his slave, go invite Kamsa. He went and brought Bar Kamsa. The host came and found him seated at the banquet. He said to him, since you're the one who tells stories about me, what in the world are you doing here? Get up and get out. So he was peeved because his enemy came, and the guy who just basically, who basically told stories or rumors about him, is now sitting at his banquet table. He said, since I've come, let me stay and I'll pay you for whatever I eat and drink. So the guy doesn't want to be embarrassed. He said to him, nope. He said to him, okay, then I'll pay you half the cost of your whole banquet. He said, no. I'll give you the whole cost of your banquet. He said, no. He grabbed him, forced him up, and threw him out. This is the basic story that you all hear from the pulpit, right? You don't see the second part. What really gets Bar Kamsa upset? Bar Kamsa thought, since the rabbis were sitting there and didn't object, it follows they were perfectly happy with such a thing. So who was sitting at this banquet? The rabbis. Rabbi Rishkin likes to say it was probably a fundraiser. What were a bunch of rabbis doing at a rich man's house? Yes. And what did they do? They stayed quiet. They basically allowed Bar Kamsa to be embarrassed, to be thrown from this party, and they sat there and did nothing. So what does he say? I'll go and report them to the government. He went and told Caesar, the Jews are rebelling against you. He said to him, how shall I know? He said to him, send them an offering, see if they offer it up. Now right off the bat, what's the problem with this? What's the problem with this? We know this is a story. Bar Kamsa all of a sudden has access to the emperor of Rome. It's like if you told the story, like all of a sudden the president, something happened to a newspaper kid on the street, and all of a sudden he went to the president of the United States and said, that it doesn't really happen in real life. But let's move on with this story.
He did say I'll pay for the whole banquet, so yeah, money.
Oh, he was a wealthy guy, but you can't get access to the emperor? Okay, maybe. Highly doubtful. Okay, the Jews are rebelling against you. How shall I know? He said, send them an offering. See if they offer it up. He, Caesar, went and sent him a fine calf. On the way, Bar Kamsa made a blemish on its upper lip, some say in the white of its eye, in a place where the Jews regard as a blemish, but the Romans don't. Rabbis considered offering it up to maintain peace with the government. Okay, so now what did they do? And this part is somewhat factual. Jews used to offer sacrifices on behalf of the government. Right? This was a pagan type society, and the Romans were, and they wanted all gods to be covered, all bases to be covered. So now, what's happening here? If the sacrifice is not offered on behalf of the Roman government, it'll look like a rebellion. Why are you doing such a thing? So rabbis offered it up. Okay, but now we have a problem. Bar Kamsa is a pretty sharp fellow. What does he do? He makes a blemish in the animal. As you all know, blemished animals cannot be offered on the altar. So Rabbi Zechariah ben Abikulus said to them, people will say they're offering blemished animals on the altar. They considered killing him, Bar Kamsa, so that he wouldn't go and report to Caesar. What had happened? Rabbi Zechariah said, they will say one who makes a blemish on holy things to be put to death. Okay, so Rabbi Zechariah can't really make a decision. Should he kill Bar Kamsa, which in halachic terms, in a sense, could be correct, because it would be considered an odef, which is someone reporting to the government on behalf of having persecution come to the Jews, or should they just accept the animal and keep peace with the government? Just keep status quo, don't start trouble. B1, said Rabbi Yochanan, the meekness, the meekness of Rabbi Zechariah is what destroyed our sanctuary, burnt our temple, and exiled us from our land. So for those of you who walked in thinking Sinat Canaan was the reason, Rabbi Yochanan did not mention that. He's basically blaming the meekness of Rabbi Zechariah from causing this. So the opening verse now, look back at the opening verse in A1. Happy is the man who is cautious always, but he who hardens his heart falls into misfortune, is referring to this. How's it referring to this? He hardened his heart and stubbornly refused to make any type of decision. In fact, what did he do? He did nothing. He didn't act. Because he didn't act either way, Jerusalem fell. You know, heard many rabbis from the pulpit talk about this, but this is the reason Rabbi Yochanan says. Okay, let's continue. C. The emperor went and sent Nero, the future emperor, against them. When he arrived, he shot an arrow to the east, and it went and fell in Jerusalem. He shot it to the west, and it came and fell in Jerusalem. And so in 4 directions of the heavens, the arrow came and fell on Jerusalem. He said to the child, tell me what verse you are learning just now. Let me just give you a little insight. Both the arrows and the studying of verses were considered omens of seeking God's will. So here the Gemara is bringing up a point that no matter where Nero shot the arrow, it still fell in Jerusalem, signaling destruction of Jerusalem. And then they used to go and ask a child, what pasuk are you learning? And whatever the pasuk said, they would say, oh, that has to be a sign. That kind of thing. That's the way it was done. Caesar sent against them Vespasian, the future Caesar. He came and besieged Jerusalem for 3 years. There were in the city 3 nobles, Nakimonos ben Gurion, ben Kaba Sabua, and ben Tzitzit HaKeset. Are these their real names? No. Every time you see names in the Gemara, you have to ask, what are their real names and what do they mean? A lot of times the names convey meaning. In this case, Nakimonos ben Gurion was so called because the sun cut through Nakda for him. Ben Kaba Sabua was called for whenever you entered his house as hungry as a dog, a kalba, a kelev, you would go out stuff, Sabua. Ben Tzitzit HaKeshet was so called because his fringes, tzitzit, would drag on cushions, kisato. There were those who say because his seat was set among the nobles of Rome. Why is the Gemara telling us about these 3 rich characters? Because they're going to be pivotal to the story. One of them said, I will provide you with wheat and barley. The next one said, I'll provide you wine, oil, and salt. And the third one said, I'll provide wood. Rabbis praised most of all the offer of wood, for Rabbi Chisda would hand over his keys to a slave except for the keys to the woodshed. For Rabbi Chisda would say, a storehouse of wheat needs 60 loaves, 60 storehouses of wood. So these men had enough food for the city for 21 years. Okay, so all we need to know about these 3 men is that they're extremely wealthy and extremely benevolent, and the city of Jerusalem could have held out for 21 years based on the supplies. Now 21 years is probably an exaggeration, but the point being, it could have held out for a long time. So the Gemara is setting the stage that Jerusalem does have enough supplies to hold out. Okay? If you look at a map, or look at a picture rather, of ancient Jerusalem, not the Jerusalem we have today, but Jerusalem was on a mountain, and it was very, very defensible because it was high and everything down was, the valley was below, that's why you went up to Jerusalem, and it was easy to fortify. So Jerusalem could have stayed sovereign for a very long time, even though they would be sieged. They had enough resources. I'm continuing. There were zealots there. The rabbis, some say thugs, zealots, whatever. These were the extremists. Let's go out and make peace with the Romans. The zealots wouldn't let that happen. They said, let's go out and make war against them. The rabbis said it wouldn't help. So right off the bat, what are the rabbis doing here?
They didn't diffuse them, they sort of antagonized them.
And another thing, they were perhaps realists, but look what they're doing. They're willing to give up the whole ship. They're willing to say, let's appease Rome. Let's not fight back. Because they probably saw that the odds were so overwhelming and there would be no chance for the Jews to win. They, the zealots, went and burnt the stores of wheat and barley, and there was a famine. So right off the bat, the Gemara, in a brilliant editorial way, tells us, in a very storytelling way, they had enough supplies. They had 3 people donating everything. The rabbis were against it, but the zealots were for it. The zealots won, so what did the zealots do? They burnt everything. Now there's no food. It's all gone. So the zealots, why did they burn the food? Why did they burn all the storehouses?
So we can fight.
Right. There was no retreat now. They wanted to really provoke the people to fight against Rome. And they were real nationalists. Right? No one would disagree with that. Okay. So now,
that part of the story critiques the zealots.
oh yeah, they're going to be blamed. Don't worry, they're going to be blamed as well. Okay, next, E. Now the Gemara is going to go into a different thing, and I'm going to tie this all together, so don't worry, I'm not leaving anything hanging here for you. Martha Bad Baitus was one of the richest women in Jerusalem. Nice Jewish name, right? So the first thing you hear that, she was probably not such a religious woman. She sent for her servant and said to him, "Go bring me some fine flour." By the time he went, it sold out. He came and said to her, "There's no fine flour, but there's white flour." She said, "All right, bring me that." By the time he went out, sold out. Back and forth. There's no white flour, there's dark flour. Go bring me that. By the time she went, it sold out. No dark flour, barley flour. Go bring me that. By the time he went, it was sold out. In the meantime, she had taken off her... So first of all, what is that telling you right there? The story back and forth with the slave. Why do you think they're going to put that story in?
We show times of famine.
Okay, that could have been done much easier, but what is it really? If you're reading this, what are you
Wasting
thinking?
time, like, why wouldn't he just buy the other flour while he's there at the store? So coming back, like, oh, there's only this one. Then, all right.
So the slave couldn't do what?
Think for himself.
And make a decision, right?
Also, she,
Wait, make a decision. That's going to tie the theme together, right? He couldn't make a decision. Who does that remind you of? Rabbi Zechariah. That's going to be the conflict. Okay. In the meantime, she had taken off her shoes. She said, "I'll go out and see whether I can find something to eat." Some dung stuck to her foot and she died. Okay, she probably had an infection or something, or she died because the foot got infected or what have you. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai recited in her regard the verse, "The tender and delicate woman among you who would not venture to set the sole of her foot upon the ground." So he quotes something from Devarim. Why does Rabbi Yochanan quote something from Devarim with this lady dying? Very interesting, because now it gives him later on in the story the ammunition to do what he's going to do, which is going to leave Jerusalem. So in fact, it seems like he's seeing a biblical prophecy materializing, and it's going to explain why he decides to leave the city and how he knows Vespasian is going to be Caesar. So there's a little foreshadowing. There are those who say she ate a date left by Rabbi Tzadok and got sick and died. Okay, who's Rabbi Tzadok? We didn't hear anything about him yet. Now the Gemara is going to tell us. Rabbi Tzadok sat and fasted for 40 years that Jerusalem would not be destroyed. When he ate something, the food could be seen because he was so thin. When he wanted to get well, they would bring him a fig and he would suck the juice and toss the rest. So this digression to Rabbi Tzadok is going to be important. It creates a very interesting contrast with the story. If there are any English majors, you can pick this up immediately. Okay. First, he fasted, right? Rabbi Tzadok fasted for the instructions. What were the rabbis doing at the beginning of the story?
feasting.
Sitting at a feast, right? Eating a banquet. He voluntarily starves himself, and what does Martha and the people of Jerusalem do? They involuntarily starve themselves. He sucked the juice from a fig to heal himself, and what does Martha do? She becomes sick, right, in those figs in an attempt not to starve. And lastly, he throws away the figs and lived. Martha throws away her treasure and dies. So it gives us a nice, real balance to this. It's playing one off the other. While she was dying, she brought out all the gold and silver and threw it into the marketplace, saying, "What in the world do I need this for?" That is in line with the verse, "They will throw the silver in the streets." Okay, so this diversion really is a very interesting stylistic way that the Gemara is trying to tell us, look at the contrast, what's going on here. It really elevates the Tzadok, it shows the situation of the city, and it also criticizes the rabbis earlier on in the Gemara, which were sitting at a feast while this guy is fasting for 40 years, supposedly, for the sake of Jerusalem not being destroyed. Okay, let's continue. F. Abba Sikara. Okay, Abba Sikra. What does that name tell us right off the bat? Abba meaning what? Father? The Sikra. Sicarians. Sicarians? Sicaria were the assassins. It means dagger in Latin. These were the assassins. If you see them earlier in Masechet Peah in the Mishnah, the Sicarians used to take over people's fields and throw them off the land. So they were these were real thugs. These were real gangsters, Jewish gangsters. And people they didn't agree with in the market, didn't agree with and didn't hold their beliefs, they used to go into the marketplace and wear long cloaks and have a dagger and stab them and kill them. They were assassins. They were paid assassins. So notice here, which most people don't pick up, really the Gemara and the editors had a very fine sense of humor. Abba Sikra, right, which means he was the father of murderers or the thief assassin, ironic name. was the chief of the Zealots in Jerusalem. So this is the king thug. He was the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's sister. Put that aside for a moment. He sent word to him, come secretly to me. He came. He said to him, how long are you going to act this way and kill everybody through famine? They calls Rabbi Yochanan, right? So Rabbi Abbas Sikra said to him, what should I do? If I say anything to them, they'll kill me. What's the irony there? Huh? He's the chief mafia guy, and he's saying, I'm worried about my people killing me. So the Gemara is poking fun at him. How much power did he really have? So you could see the society being total chaos. He said to him, find some sort of remedy for me to get out of here. Who's talking? Rabbi Yochanan says, I want to get out of here. Could you help me? You guys are controlling the exits to the city. Could you help me get out? Maybe there's a possibility of saving something. So Abbas Sikra said to him, pretend to be sick and have everybody come and ask about you. Have something bad smelling and put it with you so people will think you're dead. Then let your disciples carry you, but nobody else, so that no one will feel that you're still light, since people know that a living being is lighter than a corpse. By the way, that was an ancient theme of thinking that dead corpses weigh more than living people, which we know from science, they do not. They weigh exactly the same. So they did so. Rabbi Eliezer came at one side and Rabbi Yoshua at the other. When they got to the gate, the Zealots wanted to stab him. Why? The Zealots didn't want anyone to leave the city. So they want to make sure that Rabbi Yochanan's dead. He said to them, people will say they stabbed their master. They wanted to shove him over the wall. He said to them, people will say they shoved the master over the wall. They opened the gate and he got out. So Rabbi Yochanan escapes the city. When he got there, he said to Vespasian, peace be unto you, O king, peace be unto you, O king. Vespasian responds to him, you are subject to the death penalty on 2 counts. First of all, I'm not king, right? Calling someone king when they're not king is treason. And you calling me second, if I'm really king, then how come you didn't come to me until now? So now we're going to see a shift. The Gemara is going to blame Rabbi Yochanan for not taking action. Because in the words, they put the words in Vespasian's mouth, then how come you didn't come to see me earlier? I could have helped you. He said to him, so Vespasian's responding, as to your statement, I'm not king, the truth is you really are king. Oh, I'm sorry, Rabbi Yochanan is responding. Because if you weren't king, then Jerusalem wouldn't have been handed over to you. For it has been written, Lebanon shall fall by mighty one. He quotes some Pesukim. Mighty one refers only to king, and their mighty one shall be of themselves. Not only so, but Lebanon speaks of the temple, this godly mountain. Okay, let's move on. If I'm really king, then how come you didn't come to me until now? Up to now, the Zealots wouldn't let me come. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I couldn't come. They were holding me in the city. Vespasian said, and this is really a very interesting metaphor he gives him. So if there's a jar of honey with a snake wrapped around it, wouldn't you break the honey to get rid of the snake? Anyone want to try to decipher that? What is the jar? What's the jar? Jerusalem, right. What's the snake? Who's the snake? Zealots, good. What's the honey?
The rabbis I want peace.
Huh? No, the people. Some of the people. So let's look at it again. Jerusalem was encircled by snakes, right? The jar was circled by honey. The rabbis should have done what? They should have broken the jar, in other words, turned over the city to the Romans, to remove the danger of the snake. So at least the honey, or some of the honey, some of the people would be able to live. So this little metaphor is critical on Rabbi Yochanan. So Vespasian goes and says, how come you didn't do anything sooner? Why didn't you take action? Now, did Vespasian actually say that? Highly doubtful. But the authors of this Gemara put those words to Vespasian's mouth in order to be critical, extremely critical, of Rabbi Yochanan. What is Rabbi Yochanan's response to this? Read it. He shut up. The Gemara and the authors of the Gemara were brutally honest. We usually learn in a very sanitized version, but they were brutally honest. So they're being super critical of Rabbi Yochanan's actions. Now, look at G1. Rabbi Yosef and some say Rabbi Akiva recited in this regard, God turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish. Who's that talking about? Rabbi Yochanan. Imagine that. He ought to have said to him, we would take a pair of tongs and grab the snake and kill it, but leave the jar whole. So this kind of makes sense to be put in the words of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva sided with the Bar Kokhba rebellion. He was one of the main voices for it. He's basically saying we should have fought back. we should have fought these zealots and saved everyone. So being super critical of Rabbi Yochanan's inactions. Let's continue. In the meantime, an agent came from Rome. He said to him, "Arise, for Caesar is dead, and the citizens of Rome propose to enthrone you at the head." At that moment, Vespasian had finished putting on one boot. He wanted to put on the other, but it wouldn't go. He wanted to take off one, but it wouldn't go. He said, "What's going on? Don't be distressed. Good news has come to you. For it is written, good news makes the bones fat." So what's the solution? Bring someone that you despise and let him walk before you. A broken spirit dries up the bones. He did so and the boot went on. So the Gemara gives us a little mashal here of the boot going on and off, really just to show not much other than to show some type of higher elevation to Vespasian as he understood what the rabbis meant. Nice. He said to him, "Well, if you're so smart, how come you didn't come before now?" He said to him, "Well, didn't I already tell you?" So now he's speaking back to Rabbi Yochanan. And Vespasian, "But I told you, I gave you the metaphor." So he said, "Now I'm going away, and I'm sending someone else. So ask something from me, which I'll give you." So Rabbi Yochanan says, "Give me Yavna and its sages, and the chain of Rabban Gamliel, and a physician to heal Rabbi Tzadok." So Rabbi Yochanan asked to save some remnant of Jerusalem, some remnant of the Jewish people. Give me Yavna. This is the famous thing. Vespasian grants it to him. Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Akiva recite in this regard, God turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish. He ought to have said to him, let them off this time, which means, in another sense, give us everybody. Don't just give us Rabban Gamliel and Ezra. So look how super critical they are of Rabbi Yochanan. First of all, he didn't act. His inaction, Shem went to Vespasian and asked to try to make a deal with Rome. He didn't do that. They should have been more outgoing against the zealots. They weren't. And even in this case, even when he goes and tries to save a remnant of the Jewish people, the Gemara is super critical of him, saying he should have said, save everybody, just don't save us. Let's just save the rabbis. Okay. H2. But he thought that maybe that much Vespasian wouldn't do, and there would not be the possibility of saving anything at all. We see something very interesting about it. The story goes to here, we see a narrator come in and give us a comment. So it's trying to explain why Rabbi Yochanan didn't do that. So this sums up the first part of the story. I'm just going to review a couple of elements here. First, there are many elements of this story that are pretty accurate, that share in the same account of Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish general who actually surrendered to Vespasian and later wrote a detailed history called the Jewish War. Why we have to take that more accurately than this Gemara is because Josephus lived when? During this time. This Gemara was written 400 years later. Common elements, Josephus does mention a refusal to sacrifice an offering. The rabbinic rework of this is it shows about how one disgruntled individual, right, Bar Kamsa, goes to the Roman emperor and creates havoc. It also mentions the infighting amongst Jewish rivals. It talks about an acute famine. It talks about the death of Nero. And also Vespasian leaving the campaign. Where is that? Okay. Yeah, Vespasian leaving the campaign or throne. And Rabbi Yochanan predicted Vespasian to be Caesar, right? Interesting enough, Josephus in the Jewish War says he was the one who did that. So apparently the authors of this took that prophecy that Josephus told Vespasian and made it Rabbi Yochanan to be the person who did it. Yeah, it's a very interesting point. Okay. Let's continue. Okay, so now, Rabbi Yochanan predicted Vespasian. Okay, destruction of the temple. Okay, let's continue. What was the healing that the physicians brought to Rabbi Tzadok? On the first day they gave him, remember Rabbi Tzadok, he was the guy who was so thin that he didn't have any food. They gave him a bran soaked in water, next day water and coarse meal, on the next day water and flour. Basically they're giving him nutrients in order to fill his stomach up and get him stronger. Okay, J. Vespasian went and sent Titus, who said, where is their God, the rock in whom they trusted? Now it's interesting, doesn't anyone get like, how are these Romans knowing to quote the Torah and the Tanakh? It's a stylistic thing here. Okay. The verse refers to wicked Titus, who blasphemed and raged against heaven. What did he do? So now we have to find what Titus did that was so terrible. He took a prostitute by her hand, went into the Holy of Holies, he spread out the Torah scroll, he spread out the scroll of the Torah, and on it he committed a sexual sin, sexual relations on it. He took a sword and slashed the curtain, a miracle was done, and blood spurted out. He thought he had killed God. Your adversaries have brought in the midst of your assembly, they take their signs for true signs. Okay. So Titus did a pretty bad thing. Abba Hanan said, who is mighty like you, O God? Who is like you, and having such a thick skin that you could hear the blasphemy and raging of the wicked men and keep silent? The household of the Ishmael set forth a Tanaic statement, who is like you among the gods, right? Elim meaning gods, and they changed the word to be silent. Elim. Okay, not important. Let's leave El for now. It's just the exegesis on a pasuk, not important for this, running out of time. So, M. Titus is leaving, right? He's leaving with all the treasures of Jerusalem. M picks up the story. A storm arose at sea to drown him. He said, it appears to me that God of these people is mighty only through water. Pharaoh came along and drowned him in water. Sisera came along and drowned him in water, so he's now standing against me to drown in water. So if he's so mighty, let him come upon dry land and make war with me. A heavenly voice came forth and said, wicked man, son of a wicked man, son of wicked Esau, I have a small creature in the world called a gnat. Why is it called a gnat? Because it has a little aperture for taking in but not excreting, which scientifically we know is not. So, gnats do excrete. Disembark on dry land and go make war with it. He disembarked on dry land. A gnat came and entered his nostril and picked away at his brain for 7 years. Does everyone know this story or familiar with this? Okay. One day he was going by the gate of a blacksmith. The gnat heard the sound of hammer and stopped gnawing. He said, so I see there's a solution. So every day they hammered before them. To a Gentile blacksmith they gave 4 zuz. To an Israelite he said, just enjoy the satisfaction of seeing your enemy suffering. This went on for 30 days. From that point the creature got used to it and resumed boring. So he had no peace. It has been taught on Tanaic authority. I was among the nobles of Rome, and when he died they split his skull and found it in something like a sparrow that weighed 2 selas. In a Tanaic statement it was repeated like a young dove that weighed 2 pounds. Said up Rabbi, we have a tradition that its beak was made of brass and its talons of iron. Not important. The point is that this little gnat destroys the most powerful man on earth. That's the key. When Titus died, he said to them, burn me and scatter my ashes over the 7 seas so that the God of the Jews will not find me and bring me to trial. Okay. Q. Onkelos Bad Kalinomos was the son of the sister of Titus. He wanted to convert. He went and raised Titus from the dead through witchcraft. So right here the story goes into fantasy. So it goes from some fact to fantasy, and it's all part of one section, which I'll conclude in just a moment and tie it all together.
Lots of sons of sisters.
Yeah, interesting, good point. In the Bavli, we see a lot of the rabbis having family relations with others. In the Yerushalmi, which comes several hundred years before, there aren't those relations. It seemed when the authors of the Bavli wrote, they made one related to the other for some reason or another, to make it a real tight community. Right? Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan was brother-in-laws. The Gemara in the Yerushalmi, which came before, doesn't mention that. So Rabbi BeAb, you see the whole thing, it doesn't mention it. Okay, a stylistic thing, not for now. So now he went and raised Titus from the dead through witchcraft. So Onkelos is trying to figure out, I want to convert, but first thing before you want to convert, what do you do, David? Raise people from the dead, right? Okay. He raised them from the dead through witchcraft. He said to them, who is important in that world? He said to them, Israel. So what about joining them? He said to them, their requirements are many, and you won't be able to carry them out. Go attack them in the world, and you will be on top. For it is written, her adversaries have become the head. Whoever gives distress to Israel is made head. He said to him, so what is the punishment meted out to you? He said to him, it's precisely what I decreed on myself. Every day they collect my ashes, and they pass sentence on me, and I am burned, and my ashes are spread over the 7 seas. So now he continues asking, he went up and called up Balaam by witchcraft. He said to him, who is important in that world? Balaam says, Israel. So what about joining them? He said to him, you shall not seek their peace nor their prosperity all your days ever. Interesting enough, these are the words that was said that were put back in his mouth in the pasuk. The story of Bilam, they bring him saying this again. When you look at Devarim 23:7, you'll see how they flip this around. But it's very, very interesting. He said to him, so what is the punishment made out to you? He said, with boiling semen. So Bilam is put in boiling semen, and that's his afterlife. Why? Why is he done that? Because of the immorality he tried to get the Jews to do, the Israelites to do, when he wanted to destroy them. Okay, he went and with witchcraft raised up Jesus. Other manuscripts say the sinners of Israel, but the real manuscript, the original manuscript, says Jesus. Why was it taken out? Because of censorship. He said to him, who was important in that world? They said to him, Israel. So what about joining them? They said to him, seek their peace, but don't seek evil for them. Whoever touches them is though he touched the apple of his eye. He said to them, so what is your punishment meted out to you? They said, with boiling excrement. So Jesus boiled in the afterlife forever in boiling excrement. Why that thing? Because Jesus mocked the words of the rabbis by engaging in heresy and disobeying him. Hence, that's his punishment. For a master said, whoever ridicules the teaching of sages is punished by boiling excrement. Come and notice the difference between Israelite sinners and Gentile prophets, idolaters. So the Gemara makes it think even Jewish bad people are still better than Gentiles. How so? Right? Bilam, if you notice, said, don't pray for their welfare, but Jesus says, pray for their welfare. So it's a nice little twist there. So lastly, this section concludes with, it has been taught on Tanaitic authority, said Rabbi Elazar, come and take note of how great is the power of shame. Behold, the Holy One, blessed be He, assisted Bar Kamsa, and on that account destroyed his house and burnt his temple. And this story concludes. And the next one is going to be on Tud Malkah and Beitar. So, some very, very interesting things to conclude with. So, has anyone ever read this whole thing in its entirety before? Besides you? Besides rabbinic people here? Right. If you didn't go to a rabbi school, you'd probably never read this whole thing before. You heard snippets of it, and you never pulled it all together. But this whole story has to be looked at as one long narrative, because it's really a fascinating point. There's many conclusions that can be drawn. Let me just review some of the things here. First, the story is very critical. It shows the necessity of strong rabbinic leadership and the sages' responsibility to act spiritually, morally, and socially, and act as political leaders of the community. Here, rabbinic leadership failed, and failed dramatically. The crisis begins when the sages witness the host shaming of Bar Kamsa at a banquet, and they don't object, nor do they leave. That's fine. Nor do they leave the meal in protest. Next, the sages failed to act when confronted with a blemished sacrifice, neither compromising the law or killing Bar Kamsa. So once again, the sages failed. And they keep telling us it's our fault with Sinat Canaan, right? Next, Rabbi Yochanan condemns the weakness of Rabbi Zechariah. What did the guy do? He worried so much about the potential consequences that he paralyzed his colleagues and did nothing. He didn't act when he should have acted. Either way, killing Bar Kamsa or allowing the Korban, either way would have done something. Instead, he does nothing. And he lets events take control of him instead of him taking control of events. The censorship of meekness. Being anav, being meek or gentle, patient, humility is always seen as the highest rabbinic virtue. In fact, Harambam says that a person should always be in the middle in terms of all the character traits except one, and that's being a humble person. You should be the extreme of that. While it may be praiseworthy as an individual characteristic, the Gemara is telling us something else. When it comes time to act and not to compromise, a community leader must not be meek or humble. They must act and act decisively, or Jerusalem will fall. And that's exactly what happened here. Next, Rabbi Yochanan exhibits leadership characteristics. He recognizes the desperate situation. He takes the initiative with the zealot leader. He escapes the city. He confronts Vespasian, and he's able to save a little part of the city. Yet, he's portrayed as ambivalent. He has no answer for Vespasian's little metaphor of charge that he should have acted, and they apply to him a verse that characterizes Rabbi Yochanan as foolish. Next, we see a bizarre account of Titus, focusing on the afflictions he endured in this world and the afterlife. Why does it give the reader that? Why does it tell us about what happens to Titus? Exactly. It basically says God avenges the destruction of the temple and metes out punishment to the enemies of Israel. So the whole story with Bilam and with Jesus and with Titus are all there for a message. That while this world might be terrible, we might suffer destructions, the next world where it counts. And justice will be meted out to all. Onkelos conjures up the dead, basically showing us that pious Jews hold places of pride in the next world, and their enemies face miserable lives. However bad the situation is in this world, the righteous will eventually succeed. Lastly, the lowly gnat. Notice the contrast. The lowly gnat, the smallest of God's creatures in the story, right, causes such turmoil and devastation to the most powerful man on earth, Titus. So the whole point of that story is that God's true power is such that his smallest gnat could destroy the most powerful man. And lastly, the independent comments in the story where it tells us of the Labaton this and that offers us insight into how the sages judged the characters, evaluated their events, and more importantly, how critical they were of them. So, just to conclude, when you hear someone say Sinat Kanam, Sinat Kanam, remember A, that's only one of 10 reasons of why the Gemara gives. And secondly, one really has to look at this whole Kamsan Bar Kamsan story to really see in total how the rabbis place blame, more importantly, what to do about it, and how the seeds of redemption can be planted by taking action. Thank you so much.